laid on its side. My dad started out on the side of the truck. After the second explosion, when he landed on the opposite side of the tanks that he started out from. There happened to be two farmers. If you remember a time in 1991, we didn't have cell phones, but we had to install bag phones into our cars. 2 weeks before the accident, they had installed their very first bag phone. So when they saw and heard the explosions, they pulled up and they thought, well, let's go ahead and see if we can help in any way. They started calling 911. They saw my dad moving around. At first, they thought it was a small animal, but he was on fire. At some point, whether from the force of the explosions or from the way he landed, we have no idea how he landed either time. His left femur was broken, so every time he would try to roll to get away from the fire, his leg would just flop, keeping him from being able to roll. So these farmers pulled him out of the fire. They got the fire off of him, and they stayed with him until they took him to the county hospital, where they very quickly assessed that his injuries were beyond what they were going to be able to handle. So they had him life flighted to Lubbock, Texas, to the burn intensive care unit there. I first heard about the explosions because just before recess, just before lunchtime, my friend Tiffany had been pulled out of school by a family friend. That family friend had told Tiffany's teacher that Tiffany's grandfather, Tracy, had been killed in an explosion at work, and that 2 other men had been hurt. It's a small town, and so all the teachers began talking at lunch, and we overheard them talking that Tracy was dead and 2 other men had been injured on the job. And I stood there at recess talking with my friends, and we were all saying, well, you know, my dad works with Tracy, maybe my dad was the one that was hurt. And our teacher overheard us talking. He said, girls, it was nobody's dad, don't worry about it, just go back to playing. So that's what we did. After that, after recess, for some reason that day, we were watching the movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. To this day, I've never finished that movie because just about halfway through, the principal came in and he asked if he could talk to my teacher. They conversed for just a few moments, and as they came back into the room, they were both crying. And my teacher said, Kayla, you need to get your things together. I stood up and I started walking back towards my desk, and I asked my teacher, do I need my science book? And he said no, and I thought, okay, something serious has happened, because what teacher doesn't want you to take your homework home over the weekend? So I got my stuff together and I started walking out. My teacher pulled me into a bear hug. He said, I love you, I'll be praying for you. And I thought, okay, this is not normal. This is not how I normally leave school on Friday. The principal and I started walking down the hall, and he very uncharacteristically put his arm around my shoulder. And so with every step, I just kept thinking, well, maybe mom forgot to tell me I have a dentist appointment today, even though my mom never pulled us out of school for appointments. And well, maybe they're going to take us somewhere cool, even though they never really did anything like that by pulling us out of school. We turned the corner, and there's a group of teachers. They were all huddled together. When they saw me, they all split. Nobody would look at me, and there in the middle of them stood my mom's best friend, Connie. And Connie took a big breath. She said, let's go get your sisters. I was in 4th grade at the time in the elementary school. My sisters were in 5th and 7th grade. In the middle school, it's just a couple blocks away. So we got in Connie's car, and I said, Connie, what happened? And she wouldn't answer. And I said, Connie, where's my mom? Did something happen to my dad? And she wouldn't answer. She just kept her hands at 10 and 2 and stared straight ahead. And tears were streaming down her face. I finally stopped asking questions because I was not getting any answers. We pulled up to the middle school where my sisters were. They got in the car. Connie turned around. She looked at us, and she took a big breath. And she said, girls, your dad. And I lost it. I started crying, and I said, no, stop talking. We don't want to hear it. Because in my mind, I thought if she didn't say it, then it didn't happen. And I knew Tracy was dead, and I knew 2 other men had been injured, and I knew that my dad was working with Tracy that day. So I thought if I can just keep her from saying it, then it didn't happen. Connie got me calmed down, and she looked at my sisters, and she said, your dad was in an explosion at work today, and your mom wanted me to get you out of school because she didn't want you to hear about it from someone else. And my sister Sarah, who has kind of always been the more serious of the 3 of us, looked at Connie, and she said, is he dead? And Connie said, not yet. You went to school this morning. You thought the most exciting thing that was going to happen to you was you were going to a football game later tonight. But now I'm pulling you out of school to tell you your dad is not dead yet. Because he didn't want to take 3 minutes. Because he didn't want to step in and stop what he knew to be an unsafe act at work. Because Tracy was trying to cover up his steps. Because Tracy didn't like a supervisor. And so he didn't want to get in trouble. So he was trying to cover up his steps, and he put everyone, including my dad, in danger and lost his life because of it. Connie said, your mom wants you to get some clothes. We're going to go to your house and get your clothes and get your dog. You're going to stay with me for a little bit. So we walked into the house, and again, it's 1991, so you had to actually develop a roll of film, if you remember that far back, right? So my mom had just had a roll of film developed, and it was sitting on our kitchen counter when we walked into the house. And I started flipping through the pictures, and I came across this picture. It was the summer prior to the accident. It was the only summer that our ages lined up exactly, that all three of us were on the same softball team, and my dad was our coach. And I remember looking at this picture that day in September in our kitchen, thinking, I'm never gonna feel his hand on my shoulder again. I'm never gonna see this dad again. And I walked into my bedroom, and I started getting my things together. I went to my closet to get my clothes. And all of a sudden, I just felt like my hands were dead weight. I could not move them at all. I started crying, and Brandy, my oldest sister, came in, and she said, what's wrong? And I said, Brandy, I don't know what clothes to wear to Dad's funeral. And at this point, I'm gonna ask you to think about your child standing in front of the closet at their house, at your house. What clothes are they gonna pick out to wear to your funeral? What clothes have you seen your family wear that are appropriate to wear to a funeral for you because you were not willing to step up and stop something that you knew was not safe at work? What clothes are your family gonna wear because you decided that today you were going to cover up something, a mistake that you had already made? And now you put yourself at risk, and you put others at risk too. The decisions that you make at work, they do not affect just you. It's called the ripple effect. The minute you pick up a rock and you throw it, it does not only make an impact right on the water where it lands, instead it causes ripples. And that was what was happening that night. My sisters and I began riding the waves of the ripple effect, and we had no idea how high they were going to go and how fast they were going to fall and how long it was going to take to get to the end. And 28 years later, I'm here to tell you that the waves never stop. The ripple effect goes on and on and on. Brady said, we're just going to get close for the weekend. And so that's what we did, because in our mind, no one's ever in the hospital for longer than a weekend, right? Little did we know it would be 14 months before my dad finally did get to come home. We stayed with Connie. That night was the longest night of my life. That night was the night that I had my first panic attack. The first time I ever realized that the whole weight of the world could sit on my chest and keep me from breathing, just because I was so scared for my dad. The next morning, my mom called, and she explained a little bit more about Dad's injuries. She explained to us that right after they had gotten down into Lubbock, which is about a 5-hour drive from our hometown, that they immediately took Dad in to fix that broken femur in his leg. They were unable to fix it. They had to replace it with a metal rod, but he had lost so much blood from that he had to have several blood transfusions. He began having problems breathing because of the smoke that he inhaled after the explosions. They put him on a ventilator. Once he went into surgery, from that point on, he became medically sedated. They would not let him wake up. He was unconscious. He could not move or anything. He was swelling to the point, at some point, that it was restricting blood flow. And so the doctors had to do what's called an escharotomy. They cut him down each side of his leg, down each side of his arm to expand so that blood could flow. And then the next day, on Saturday, when my mom called us, after she called us, he continued to swell again to the point that it was restricting blood flow. And so they had to do another escharotomy down the opposite side of the legs, down the opposite side of the arms, and across the chest, as if the burns are not bad enough. She explained that he had been burned 63% of his body in second and third degree burns. 63%, because when he heard the sound of the explosion coming out, he turned and he started to run. Where his shirt ended, which is about right here, all the way down, his hands are burned because he was not wearing his gloves. And there's this funny thing about PPE. If you don't wear it, it can't protect you. But there wasn't going to be any brushing or grinding for him to do, so he didn't even have his gloves on. They were in the cab of the truck. And so his hands are completely burned. Where his shirt made a V all the way up, his neck, his head, his face, everything was completely burned. But most significantly, his legs were burned. And the reason his legs were burned was because back in 1991, what was protocol for that company at that time was to wear 100% cotton jeans. And he had ordered 2 new pairs of jeans, but in order to save $4 on those jeans, he ordered 60% cotton, 40% polyester, thinking that if at most anything that would ever get on him would be a spark and he'd be able to brush it across. Because no one ever plans on being in back-to-back explosions. No one ever plans on laying in a ball of fire and then having that ball of fire explode and then landing in even more fire. So when he did, the cotton is fine on his pants, but what happened to the polyester? It melted into his legs. It melted layer of skin through his dermis layer, through every muscle and every nerve ending in his legs, where his briefs ended to the top of his boots, burned. And so the doctors had a formula for figuring out chance of survival. They add 63% of his body, which was burned, to his age. He was 32 years old at the time. Add that together is 95. They subtract that number from 100, and that gave my dad a 5% chance of survival. And that's what my mom called to tell us. She said, girls, Dad has a 5% chance of survival. And we were, of course, very upset about that news. And what do we do, Mom? We're a very faith-filled family, so my mom said the only thing we can do is pray. And so we began praying every time the phone rang. God, please don't let that be someone saying my dad is dead. Every step, every breath we took was, God, please don't let my dad die. Sure enough, Saturday night, his heart stopped twice. But both times, there happened to be a respiratory therapist that was standing by him. She flicked him on the chest, and his heart started again. Then every night my mom would call. We were staying with our friend Connie and her husband and their 3 kids. She would call and give us an update on Dad. And one day she called and she said, now Dad is fighting a blood infection because of all the oil and gas that seeped in through the burns. He's fighting a blood infection. One day she called and she said his kidneys are starting to shut down. They're going to have to start him on dialysis. She called one time and said now he has pneumonia. He's having to fight that on top of everything. One day she called and she said, girls, I've got some bad news. It's really hard for you to hear, but you need to know it so you can begin to process it. Dad is probably going to lose his legs and his hands. The doctors just don't think that he has enough circulation in them. They don't think they're going to be able to keep them alive. And then about a week later, she called and she said, actually, now they think the only thing he's going to lose are his feet and his fingers. And solely by the grace of God, the only thing my dad lost was his left thumbnail, a patch of hair on the back of his head, the tip of his nose, and the tip of his right ear, which I love. If you look at this picture, the man had Dumbo ears, so it's not real bad that he lost part of his ear. We're okay with that. But about 3 weeks after the explosions, my mom called and she said, you guys need to be praying for your dad. Tomorrow is a tank day. And a tank day was this, as soon as you have a burn, you have to get rid of that dead skin in order to allow, in his case, for a skin graft or for new skin to grow. So the way they got rid of that in 1991, the most humane way they could think of to do that was they put him in what essentially looked like a big horse trough. It was a big bathtub. They would put him in it and they would scrub on his burns to get rid of the dead skin. He was medically sedated, he was intubated. They would give him an extra dose of morphine and still he would try to scream out in pain. 3 weeks after the accident, we finally did get to go down and see my dad. And I will never forget seeing my mom for the first time. That was an amazing, amazing feeling, seeing her, because 3 weeks is a long time for a kiddo to be without their mom. It's a long time for a mama to be without her kids as well. When they took us back to see my dad, of course, we had to gown up. We had to wear booties and a gown and a hairnet and a mask and gloves. They took us back and they had said, you know, he's going to look like he's asleep and there's all these machines and beeping, don't be scared. And so we're like, okay, great, he's taking a nap, we got it. So we started walking in and my sister Sarah took 2 steps in and she took 2 steps back. She decided if he's going to die, I don't want to remember him like this. It wasn't until the next day that she actually did go in and see him. But Brandy and I kept going up on either side of him and my mom was with me. And it sounds so juvenile to say it, but the word that kept coming out was, that's not my dad, that's a monster. A monster is what was laying on that bed. He was black. Still 3 weeks after the accident, he was so swollen from the heat of the explosions, you could not tell where his chin ended and his neck began. His lips were massively swollen. And we were very scared of him. My mom at one point said, you can touch him. And I looked at his hand and I thought, I don't want to touch him. He's gross. He's not the dad. I expected it to be softball dad who's, you know, maybe just taking a nap. But it was not dad. And that was a very hard process for me to get to the point where eventually I did want to touch him and I did want to talk to him. We did get there, but it was a very slow moving process through that time. Almost 3 months after the accident, my dad finally did wake up. He woke up just before Thanksgiving and my mom called and said, he's awake, he loves you, he wants you to know he loves you, but it hurts too much to put the phone up to his ear. And I can't imagine now, at my age, how much pain he had to have been in for even just a phone to be put up to his ear was too much for him. At that point, the doctors had decided that he was going to live and he was going to need some pretty extensive rehab that they did not offer at that hospital. And so my mom made the decision to move him down to the Rehabilitation Institute of San Antonio. It's called RIOSA for short, and because it is 11 hours away from our hometown, my mom decided to move all of us down to San Antonio. And so we got an apartment, my mom and my sisters and I, and my dad was an inpatient in San Antonio. He would have 5 hours of therapy every day. This is what he's doing several months after we got to San Antonio. Right now he's working on occupational therapy, working his hands, getting movement in his fingers. He had an hour of physical therapy, working on his back and giving him strength at first just to sit up and eventually to walk again. He would have a rest time, lunch time, then he would go back for another hour of occupational therapy, another hour of physical therapy, and then an hour of recreational therapy. And recreational therapy was everything from picking up a puzzle piece and learning how to put it in a puzzle without getting frustrated, to standing up on his own and shooting a pool cue without losing his balance. But often, recreational therapy was taking my dad out in public as a family. It was family therapy for us, and we would learn what it's like to be with a handicapped father. At first, we had to learn how do you navigate dad in a wheelchair without bumping his knees and causing them to bust open. We often went to the mall for recreational therapy just so that as a family we could get used to being stared at, because that is what we took in public. He would often have on these skin garments. You can see they go all the way from his neck all the way down. He normally has them on his hands, but he doesn't on this picture because he's working on therapy. And those are skin tight garments that keep the scar tissue from puffing up. And then the face mask. And the face mask is a hard piece of plastic that was molded for his face specifically. We would hold it, one of us would push it onto his face as hard as we could, and the other one would wrap it around his head and Velcro it on the other side, again to keep the scar tissue from puffing up. But taking him out in public, because we were preteens at the time, 9, 10, and 12, and then eventually we all turned a year older while we were in San Antonio. So then we were 10, 11, and 13, and that's a hard age to decide that you want dad to look like this. I mean, none of us wanted him to look like this, but were we okay with him looking like that? That was the other question we had to decide. Are we okay with taking face mask dad out? Because you don't get to flip through the photo album. You don't get to redo the day of September 20th, 1991. You can't go back to being softball dad. You could only go forward now. Safety is forward thinking. How am I going to deal with this issue that I have today with the best of my knowledge of what happens today? Just because it worked yesterday does not mean that it's going to work today. Is there a safer way to do this today than there was yesterday? That was the trap that Tracy fell into. He decided that because he had gotten away with that welding one time, he could do it again and not cost him his life. Very nearly cost my dad his life. Safety has to be forward thinking, and we began to realize in San Antonio our life had to be forward thinking. We can't go back and change dad. We can't go back and make him into the softball dad, even though we desperately wanted to.